We'll leave that and move to our next, please.
Stan Lindsay. How far are politicians being obsequious in their dealings with the proprietors and editors of the popular press, as suggested in the Times this morning? If that description is apt, how far is that behaviour justified?
In the context of the leader of your party, what do you think, Rory Stewart? Is he pretty obsequious in his dealings with Rupert Murdoch and the clan?
Surprisingly enough, I'm going to say, no, he's not. Actually, politicians and the media has been a problem for a very, very long time. Even Churchill was astonishingly obsequious in his dealings with the press. He didn't only give them peerages, he put people like Lord Beaverbrook straight in the middle of the cabinet. And we really need to rethink this, because it's really useful having journalists attacking us. It's really useful having journalists investigating us. We need to be held accountable. But
But not too much.
But actually, I lived briefly in the United States, and to some extent I do feel that the American media can have a good example for us. The New York Times did seem to me to be better at fact-checking, have a more responsible attitude to it, did brilliant investigative journalism, that on the Washington Post, exposing the corruption and the horror of politicians from Watergate through to the Iraq War. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a relationship which is about intrusion on privacy, phone hacking, and being above the law.
And Douglas Murray.
Well, first of all, I mean, I'm uncomfortable with the way in which Rupert Murdoch has become the sole whipping boy of this debate. I mean, Rupert Murdoch has done some good in the British media, some significant good. He diversified the media, he made it a much more vibrant, investigative media, and I know that a lot of people feel that he's dumbed down the media, and he has certainly had a role in that as well, but it's not all bad. And I have to say that some of the victimization in recent years, in recent days, I think, has been over the top. But I just say this, I think the answer to this is a small c conservative argument, if I may say so, which is, to me, the most shocking thing in this whole episode has not actually been that politicians want to make friends with press barons. It's that our institutions in this country, one by one, have failed. It is a disgrace that Rebecca Brooks could sit in front of a parliamentary committee and admit that she and her newspaper had bribed policemen, and nothing happened. That was 2 years ago. Where was the Crown Prosecution Service? Where were the police force? Where was Parliament? And I mean, as for the Press Complaints Commission, I mean, all of these institutions failed. So the answer is not to divert attention onto simply going after one man and making it, oh, Murdoch, Murdoch. It is to reform these institutions and get them doing the job they're paid to do.
Are you optimistic? Are you optimistic that with the renewed inquiries by the Met, the official inquiries that are underway, that the clean-up operation, in your terms as it would have to be, is underway, and that the institutions involved will be thereby strengthened?
Well, it's underway, among other things, because finally some of our politicians in relation to this have found some balls and started to speak out. But it is a disgrace that until very recently, now, in recent weeks, we've actually had MPs admitting that they were on select committees and they were effectively blackmailed, that if you don't do what we want, you might get investigated by the News of the World. Why are they saying that now? Why didn't they say it years ago? Why didn't they come out and say, I'm a politician, I'm in Parliament, and I'm being blackmailed by the press? This is a disgrace. Everyone's found their voice now.
Peter Scroop, does the panel think that the campaign groups are right to boycott the British government's inquiry into alleged torture and mistreatment?
Gisela Stewart just touched on information and when it was valid and when it wasn't valid. The Guardian's reported today that it has documents, seen documents, which instructed MI5 and MI6 to weigh the importance of information that they gleaned against the amount of pain that it was expected to cause to those who have been arrested. This is in the context of the inquiry led by Sir Peter Gibson, the retired judge, which is, on these grounds, being boycotted because some of these documents are not apparently going to be made available to the inquiry. Liberty, Amnesty, for instance, are saying that there is no credibility or transparency, and that the right to withhold documents, which is the Cabinet Secretary's right, invalidates this inquiry. Are those campaign groups right to boycott? What do you think? Douglas Murray?
I have to say, I don't see the point of the inquiry myself. It's been a disastrous episode, this. It has been from the outset. The situation the British government has got itself in, of course, is that it has already paid out-of-court settlements to a number of people who allege they were the victims of torture in order to try to put this to rest. The result has been quite the opposite, which is that it looked like an admission of guilt. And I have to say, I don't have very much sympathy with some of the groups who are talking about boycotting this inquiry, because some of the groups, without getting into what I know the BBC will regard as rightly difficult legal terrain, have in recent years had very questionable relations with some of the people who would be making accusations at this stage. And I think that some of the groups that are now acting as arbiters have made very foolish alliances, very foolish judgments themselves in recent years. And so I wouldn't want to go to them as the arbiters on this. The reason I'm against the inquiry is because I really don't think it's going to be able to expose much that's of very much help. And if our intelligence service is to be held accountable for actions of foreign intelligence agencies, then having some experience of inquiries, judicial inquiries, I would say that a lot of this information just will not be able to be made public. When it's not made public, people will ask why, and the simple fact is that it can't be, because you need to be able to operate an intelligence service.
I mentioned two of the groups, and there are several of them. Yes. And because I mentioned them, and because of what you've just said about some of those groups, I'd just like to clarify, which I think I should, that you're not making those assertions about, for instance, Liberty or Amnesty International.
I think there has been an extremely complex and I think critical relationship in recent years between those groups and others with some of the people who are complainants now. And I think that it's something which those groups should themselves look at, because in some of the cases they have been hailing people who are not good people as human rights heroes because they say that they have undergone torture. And because you may allege that you have undergone torture or may have done so does not make you a morally good person. On this
question of substance, weighing the importance of information against the amount of pain that's expected to cause in order to have that information extracted, do you believe that there is a valid balance there, or do you think that is improper and at odds with the characteristics of a free society?
I have no particular strong feeling on it.
No particular strong feeling?
No. I'm sorry. I know one's meant to have a strong feeling on everything. I just don't on that one.
Rory Stewart.
On the one hand, you can feel some sympathy for the intelligence officers who are involved in this. Again and again, they say it's very difficult for them to operate, it's very difficult for them to interview terrorists, it's very difficult for them to get information that they say protects the United Kingdom. But this is the most fundamental principle. We should not in any way be talking to people who are tortured. Mm-hmm. And this isn't simply a question of humanity, which it is, but it's also a question of who we are, what kind of country we are, what kind of nation we want to be. This investigation matters because in the end it's about our values. It's what makes us proud, I believe, to be British, and we should be very firm and very clear that despite our understanding of what these officers are talking about, they should be held to account, and we should make it absolutely clear that we never involve in anything connected with torture.
Will it reconfirm the absolute legal fact that torture is illegal, and those who condone or take part in it, or these civil servants, are guilty in a legal act? Will it expose them, and will they be subject? It will not. The person who chairs this is an independent, I agree. The person who chairs this...
Someone in the audience said it was a whitewash.
Is the intelligence commissioner. The ministers will decide what information is given, and the representatives of those, whatever Douglas believes they're links with, the representatives of the people who wish to ask questions will not be allowed to ask questions. This is a charade, and it is absolutely right that the bodies have said, I'm sorry, we will not take part in this charade. There was promised an independent, open inquiry. That needs to take place. It needs to take place because torture is illegal, it's immoral, and it's utterly counterproductive.
Everyone is in agreement everyone is in agreement, Mike, that torture is wrong and that it is counterproductive. The question now is whether or not a conducive inquiry can take place publicly, which would have to, by its nature, need to release information to the public domain, which cannot be released into the public domain for security reasons. And
as I said, that wrongdoing had taken place,
and
they would have to punish the wrongdoers.
Well,
that is the issue. That is the issue.
You're making it a lot simpler than it is.
No,
which is that, among other things, if our intelligence services deal with foreign intelligence agencies who give them some information which they subsequently find out has come from such a bad and tainted source, what do we do about it? And as I would say, my simple experience of inquiries on this sort of thing is that it is extremely hard, even decades after, to give the full public revelation that you would wish to have, and so people will always come away uncomfortable and unsatisfied.
Hilary Brown, should the independence referendum be held without delay?
Fair enough, Douglas Murray.
Mike seems to have learned a lesson from Europe, which is you only ask people their opinion as a populace if you know that they're going to give you the right answer. And they aren't really
Thank you for your confidence in the outcome. I'm grateful for it.
They aren't really interested in the referendum other than that. They do the same thing to you as they do in Europe, in Brussels on this. And if you don't get it right first time, in their view, they'll come back and ask you again and again. I just think on a broader thing, I find as I'm half Scottish, half English, I love being British. And I have to say, I think what the SNP is doing to this country is a tragedy.
Rory Stewart.
The central thing is that this is something that concerns the whole of Britain. It has been a very, very unique, very powerful relationship between two countries from which we've both benefited. We need a clear, simple question presented without too much jiggery-pokery and mucking around. It should not be driven by one political party or another, and it should not be a three-way choice. It should be an in or out choice. And personally, I agree with Douglas. I think it would be the greatest tragedy, not just for Scotland, but for England, because we're much, much better off together.
Good evening, Roy Dowsett. The kiss of the sun for pardon, the song of the birds for mirth, one is nearer God's heart in a garden than anywhere else on earth. So apart from Inverewe Garden, which, as your hosts, has to be your first choice, where is your favourite garden?
Your favourite garden, very swiftly, if you can. Who would like to start on this? Everyone's looking in different directions, but I think Rory wants to start on this.
If you haven't had a chance to visit it, Acorn Bank in Cumbria is one of the most special gardens in the world. A full working medieval watermill, incredible collection of Westmoreland apple trees. The only problem this year is we had May, June and July simultaneously. But get there to see it in August.
And very briefly, I'm sorry, Douglas.
My favourite is my own garden. It doesn't have a bandstand, and I don't want you all to come. But it's an absolute catastrophe, and I haven't got any plants I've planted, and it's all overgrown and wild, but it's my own, so I'm happy.